The year was 2487, and the great orbital station, called Threshold Prime, hung silent in the void of space as representatives from 100 worlds gathered in fear. Their faces showing the kind of terror that came only when death itself knocked on your door, Ambassador. Yellen Vasquez stood at the back of the massive chamber, her dark eyes watching the chaos unfold before her as alien species older than humanity's first campfire screamed and argued and pointed claws and tentacles at holographic maps showing the advance of the enemy fleet. The HFY Dominion had declared war on the Galactic Concord, and everyone in that room knew what that meant. They called the HFY many things across the galaxy, but the most common name was simple and terrifying: demons standing nearly 3 meters tall with 6 powerful limbs, covered in obsidian black scales that could stop plasma fire. The HFY had spent 10,000 years conquering everything they touched, erasing civilizations, burning worlds, leaving nothing behind but ash and silence. No species had ever defeated them in open war. And now their massive fleet moved toward Concord space like a tide of darkness that could not be stopped. The Alorian High Speaker, an ancient being of light and crystal who had lived for over 50,000 years, raised one shimmering hand to call for order in the chamber. "We must discuss our options," the speaker said in a voice that rang like bells. "Though I fear our options are few and our time is short," a Varathi admiral, his gray skin covered in the ritual scars of his warrior caste, slammed his fist on the table before him. "We have no options," he growled. "The HFY cannot be reasoned with, and they cannot be defeated. And every species in this room knows the truth we are afraid to speak. We will fall, just as every other civilization has fallen before them." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber, and Yellen watched as hope died in the eyes of beings who had seen stars born and die. That was when she stepped forward, her human boots making soft sounds on the ancient floor as she walked toward the center of the chamber, where the galaxy's most powerful leaders sat in despair. "Earth requests permission to speak," she said, her voice calm and clear. Alorian speaker turned those ageless eyes toward her, and Yellen saw something in them that made her smile, the gentle condescension that every elder race showed to humanity, as if they were looking at a child who had wandered into a room full of adults. "The Concord recognizes the representative from Earth," the speaker said kindly, "though we remind our human friends that this matter concerns military strategy beyond what your young species has experienced." Yellen nodded respectfully, hiding the fire that burned in her chest. "With respect to the Concord," she began, "Earth offers to deploy military forces to assist in the defense against the HFY." For a moment, the chamber was silent, and then laughter erupted from a dozen different species, the sound echoing off walls that had witnessed 10,000 years of galactic politics. The Varathi admiral shook his scarred head with something like pity in his yellow eyes. "Little human," he said, "not unkindly, your species has been part of this Concord for barely 200 years. And in that time you have shown yourselves to be clever traders and curious explorers. But war against the HFY requires something more than cleverness." "Indeed," added the Alorian speaker, that gentle tone never wavering. "Humans are known for their adaptability and their emotional nature, qualities we find quite charming. But the HFY are born in pain chambers where they learn to embrace suffering from their first breath. They feel no fear, they know no mercy, and they consider death in battle to be the highest honor any being can achieve. Your soldiers, brave as they may be, would be torn apart in moments." Yellen let them finish, let the laughter fade, let the pitying look settle on her face like ash. Then she smiled, and something in that smile made the nearest delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Will you not ask to lead your armies?" she said softly. "We ask only for permission to deploy a single unit to the besieged world of Vareth 9 is a demonstration of human military capability. The Varathi admiral leaned forward with narrow eyes. One unit against the Kethvari legions that have already taken half that world? He asked. That is not a demonstration, Ambassador. That is suicide. Perhaps, Yellen replied, but it is our suicide to choose. And when we fail, as you clearly expect us to, the Concord will have lost nothing but a handful of humans that you consider insignificant anyway. The chamber fell silent as the elder races considered her words. And she could see the calculation in their ancient eyes. Let the humans die. Learn from their mistakes. Lose nothing of real value. The Elorian speaker nodded slowly. The Concord grants Earth permission to deploy one military unit to Vareth 9. The speaker announced. May your soldiers find honor in their sacrifice. Yellen bowed deeply, hiding the cold smile that crossed her face. Thank you, she said. You will not regret this decision. As she walked out of the chamber, her communication device already connecting to Earth's military command. She heard whispers following her departure. Poor humans. They mean well. Such a shame they will learn this lesson in blood. 8 hours later, in a secure facility buried deep beneath the mountains of Earth, a file that had been sealed for over a century was finally opened. The file was labeled Project Fenrirari Elite Unit Protocols, and the officers who read it felt a chill run down their spines, despite the warmth of the underground bunker across human space. From colony worlds to deep space stations to the crowded cities of Earth itself, 12 individuals received the same encrypted message at the exact same moment. They were men and women from different backgrounds, different nations, different lives, but they all shared one thing in common. They had been trained for this day, trained to become something that humanity had hoped it would never need again. The message was simple, containing only 4 words that meant everything. The leash is off in a small apartment on Mars. A woman named Yuki Tanaka set down the book she had been reading to her daughter and stared at her communication device with eyes that had suddenly gone cold and empty in a fishing village on Earth's northern coast. A man called Alexander Volkov put down his nets and looked out at the gray sea, his scarred hands clenching into fists in a hospital on a distant colony world. A doctor named Marcus Chen excused himself from his patient's bedside and walked into the corridor, his gentle face transforming into something hard and ancient. 12 wolves, scattered across the stars, heard the call and began to run, and somewhere in the depths of space, moving ever closer to the innocent world of Vareth 9, the Kethvari Dominion prepared for another easy conquest, completely unaware that something was coming for them. Something that would teach them the meaning of fear for the first time in 10,000 years. The galaxy had dismissed humanity as children playing at civilization. Too emotional, too fragile, too short-lived to matter in the grand sweep of cosmic history. They were about to learn how wrong they were about to meet the wolves that humanity kept chained in the darkness of their souls. The savage legacy of 1,000,000 years of survival against predators and nature and each other. They were about to learn why humans smiled when they talked about their capacity for violence. That knowing smile that hid teeth sharper than any claws. Demons were coming to Vareth 9. But something far worse was coming to meet them, and when the dust settled and the screaming stopped, the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. The skies above Vareth 9 burned orange and red as Kethvari dropships descended through the atmosphere like metal rain, their hulls glowing from the heat of entry, while the native Sorashi population huddled in underground bunkers and prayed to gods who seemed to have abandoned them. General Talith of the Soreshi Defense Force stood in his command, centered deep beneath the planet's surface, watching holographic displays that showed nothing but death and defeat on every front. His people were dying, his soldiers were broken, and the demons showed no mercy to anyone they caught above ground. When his communication officer told him that a human ship had entered the system, Talith felt nothing but confusion mixed with tired despair. "One ship?" he asked, his 4 eyes blinking slowly as he tried to understand what he was hearing. "Yes, General," the officer replied. "A small transport vessel, barely larger than our own shuttles, requesting permission to approach the planet." Talith watched his display as the tiny human ship dove toward the HFY blockade, a wall of warships that had destroyed everything the Sareshi had sent against them. "They will be torn apart in seconds," he said quietly, almost to himself, but the human ship did not die instead. It twisted and spun through the blockade with movements that seemed impossible, dodging plasma fire by margins so small that Talith's computers could barely track them, weaving between HFY destroyers, like a fish swimming through a net that could not catch it. The Sareshi officers watched in stunned silence as the transport broke through the blockade and plunged toward the planet's surface, its engines screaming as it dove toward a landing zone behind enemy lines. "They crashed deliberately," one officer whispered as the ship's signal disappeared into HFY-controlled territory. "Why would they crash their own ship on purpose?" Talith had no answer, and he turned back to his displays with a heavy heart, certain that whatever strange humans had been aboard that vessel were now dead, or soon would be. He was wrong. 12 hours later, a Sareshi reconnaissance drone captured footage that would change everything General Talith believed about the universe. The drone's camera showed a HFY encampment of nearly 300 warriors, massive obsidian-scaled demons who had been preparing to assault the last Sareshi defensive line. But something had happened to that encampment, and the night bodies lay everywhere, arranged in patterns that seemed deliberate and horrifying, positioned to spell out words in the HFY language, using the corpses of the dead, written in demon blood on the largest tent, were words that made Talith's translator struggle. "We see you in the dark, and the dark is where we live." 300 HFY warriors, beings who had never known fear, who had trained since birth to embrace death, who had conquered 1,000 worlds, all of them dead, all of them killed by something that moved through their camp like smoke and shadow, something that left only one survivor, a single HFY soldier found wandering the edges of the camp with broken eyes and a shattered mind. Survivor spoke only one phrase, repeating it over and over until his own people silenced him out of shame. They smiled. "They smiled while they killed us. They smiled." General Talith demanded to meet the humans responsible. And 3 hours later, 12 figures in matte black armor walked into his command center like they owned it. There were no insignia of rank or nation, no flags or symbols of any kind, except for a small image scratched into their shoulder plates. A wolf's head with eyes that seemed to glow even in the dim light of the bunker. Their leader was a man called Alexander Volkov, though Talith would later learn that his squad called him Sasha when they were not on mission. Volkov was not tall by human standards and not particularly muscular, with gray hair cut short and eyes the color of winter ice that seemed to look through Talith rather than at him. "Commander Volkov," Talith said carefully, "my people owe you a debt that we can never repay, but I must ask, what are you?" Volkov's face did not change, remaining as still and cold as a frozen lake. "We are Fenrir Squad," he answered in a voice that was soft and calm and somehow terrifying. "And we are what humanity hoped it would never need again." Behind Volkov stood 11 other humans, men and women of different sizes and colors and backgrounds. But they all shared the same quality that Talith could not quite name: a stillness, a patience, the quiet readiness of predators who knew that everything around them was prey. One of them was a small woman with dark hair and kind eyes who introduced herself as Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka. And when she smiled at Talith, there was genuine warmth in her expression. "We are here to help your people, General," she said gently. "That is all you need to know." Over the following days, Talith watched the 12 humans wage a war unlike anything he had ever witnessed. They did not fight like soldiers, meeting the enemy in honorable battle and accepting losses as the cost of victory. They fought like something older, something primal, something that crawled out of the darkness at the dawn of time and learned that survival was the only law that mattered. They used the terrain like a weapon, the darkness like a cloak, the enemy's own expectations like a trap. They struck without warning and vanished without trace, leaving behind nothing but dead demons and fear that spread through the HFY ranks like a diseased. Talith watched footage of Fenrir's squad ambushing a demon, patrol 10 times their size, moving through the enemy formation with a brutal efficiency that made his blood run cold. They did not waste movement or energy. Each strike calculated to cause maximum damage with minimum effort. And they worked together with a coordination that seemed almost telepathic. But what disturbed Talith most was what happened between battles when they were not fighting. The humans were almost shockingly normal. They laughed together around small fires, sharing jokes in languages Talith's translator could not fully capture. They talked about families back home, about foods they missed, about dreams they had for the future. Lieutenant Tanaka spent hours in the Sarishi medical facilities, treating wounded civilians with a gentleness that brought tears to Talith's eyes. She sang soft songs to frightened children and held the hands of the dying. And not a single being who saw her in those moments could believe she was the same person who had killed 40 HFY warriors with her bare hands the night before. I do not understand, Talith finally admitted to Commander Volkov one evening as they stood on an observation deck watching the distant flashes of HFY weapons fire. What do you not understand, General? Volkov asked without looking at him. How can beings so gentle become so savage? Talith asked, how can the same woman who sings lullabies to my people's children become a monster that makes demons afraid? Volkov was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was heavy with something that might have been sorrow. We are not savage because we enjoy it, he said quietly. We are savage because we love things worth protecting. And there is nothing more dangerous in this universe than a human who fights for something they love. He turned to face Talith, and in those winter eyes, the general saw something vast and ancient and terrible. The HFY kill because death is all they know, Volkov continued. They were bred for war, shaped by pain, taught that suffering is sacred and mercy is weakness. But humans? He asked honestly. We chose this, General. We looked into the darkness inside ourselves, and we chose to master it rather than let it master us. And that is why the demons will never defeat us, because we fight not to die gloriously, but to live, to protect, to see another sunrise and hold the people we love. That is a weapon no amount of training can create, and no amount of strength can overcome. Somewhere in the distance, a HFY war horn sounded, and Talith saw Volkov's face change in an instant from tired soldier to something cold and hungry and utterly without mercy. They are coming. General, Volkov said as he reached for his weapons. You should get your people to safety. What about you? Talith Volkov smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf who just spotted wounded prey. We will be fine, he said. The demons think they are the hunters here, but they are about to learn the truth. Tonight, we teach them what fear really means. And as Fenrir's squad moved out into the darkness like shadows with teeth, General Talith finally understood why the galaxy had underestimated humanity for so long. They hid their wolves so well that no one believed they existed until it was far too late. High above the burning world of Vareth-9, the HFY command vessel Endless Scream hung in the void like a metal mountain. Its obsidian hull decorated with the skulls of 100 conquered species, and its corridors filled with the sounds of 10,000 warriors, preparing for battle in the deepest chamber of that terrible ship. War Master Kethzol sat upon a throne made from the bones of his enemies and studied the reports coming from the planet below with growing unease. Kethzol was ancient, even by demon standards, having led the Dominion's armies for over 300 years. And in all that time, he had never encountered anything that made him hesitate until now. The reports spoke of human soldiers who moved like ghosts through the night, killing HFY warriors without sound or warning, leaving behind bodies arranged in mocking patterns and messages written in blood. His advisors stood before him, their massive forms shifting nervously as they tried to explain what was happening on the surface. The humans are aberrations, War Master, General Kethville said, his voice deep and rumbling like distant thunder. They are defective specimens from a weak species. Nothing more than a nuisance that we will crush when we commit our full force. Then why have we not crushed them already? Kethville asked, his voice cold and quiet in a way that made his generals flinch. Silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the distant hum of the ship's engine. Kethville rose from his throne and walked to a view screen that showed images of the human soldiers, captured by drones and surviving warriors before they too were killed. He studied the humans carefully, knowing how small they were compared to HFY warriors, how fragile their unarmored bodies appeared, how weak they should have been by every measure the Dominion used to judge strength. "Bring me the archives," he commanded. "Everything we have on the human species, from their first contact with the galaxy to the present day." For 3 days, Kethzol studied the history of humanity, and with each passing hour his unease grew deeper and more troubling. He learned of a species that had nearly destroyed itself multiple times through wars of such devastating scale that they left scars on their own planet visible from space. He learned of weapons they had created that could end all life on a world, weapons they had built and used against their own kind before they ever reached the stars. He learned of their capacity for cruelty that rivaled anything the HFY had ever done. Death camps, genocides, tortures so creative and horrible that even demon interrogators would have been impressed. But he also learned of something else, something that puzzled and disturbed him more than all the violence combined. He learned of humans who threw themselves on explosives to save their friends, of mothers who lifted vehicles off their children with strength that should have been impossible, of soldiers who fought to the last breath, not for glory or honor, but simply because they refused to let their comrades die alone. He learned of a species that could commit the most terrible acts imaginable, and then turn around and show mercy to their defeated enemies, rebuilding the nations they had destroyed and helping their former foes become allies. They are not consistent, Kethzol muttered to himself as he read report after report. They are chaos wrapped in flesh, capable of anything and predictable in nothing. When his advisors returned to hear his conclusions, the War Master spoke words that would have been heresy from any other demon's mouth. "We have made a mistake," he said flatly. "These humans are not weak. They are simply different from us in ways we failed to understand." "Different how, War Master?" General Kethville asked carefully. Kethville turned to face his generals with eyes that burned with new knowledge and old doubt. "The HFY were bred for war," he explained. "For 10,000 years we have shaped ourselves to be perfect warriors, removing fear, eliminating doubt, embracing death as our highest purpose. But the humans," he continued, "they chose their warriors from ordinary people. They took farmers and teachers and doctors and turned them into killers when needed. And then they turned them back into farmers and teachers and doctors when the killing was done. That is weakness," General Kethville insisted. "A warrior should be a warrior always." "No," Kethzol said softly. "That is adaptability. And it is a strength we have bred out of ourselves over countless generations." He pulled up an image of Commander Volkov, taken by a surveillance drone moments before the drone was destroyed. "Look at this human," the War Master commanded. "He is small. He's old by their standards. He is nothing that our breeding programs would consider worthy. But he has killed more HFY warriors in 2 weeks than most enemy armies kill in years. And he has done it with a handful of soldiers against thousands of our best troops." The general shifted uncomfortably, and Quetzal could see the doubt in their eyes. Doubt not in him, but in the certainty they had carried their entire lives. "The humans have something we lost long ago," Quetzal continued. "They have the ability to become monsters when they need to, and then stop being monsters when the need has passed. We made ourselves into perfect killing machines, but we forgot how to be anything else. They remember, and that memory makes them more dangerous than we ever imagined." On the surface of Vareth 9, Fenrir squad continued their campaign of terror against the HFY occupation. And with each passing day, the demon forces grew more afraid. So Rishi civilians watched in wonder as the 12 humans moved among them like guardian spirits, protecting them during the day and hunting demons at night. A young Sarishi girl named Kira found Lieutenant Tanaka sitting alone one evening, cleaning her weapons with methodical care while humming a soft melody. "Why do you fight for us?" Kira asked, her 4 eyes wide with curiosity and a child's fearlessness. Tanaka looked up and smiled, and Kira saw that her eyes were kind, even though her hands held instruments of death. "Because someone has to," Tanaka answered simply. "But you are not Sareshi," Kira pressed. "This is not your world, and we are not your people." Tanaka set down her weapon and pulled the girl close, and her voice was gentle when she spoke. "When I was young, my grandmother told me a story about wolves," she said. "She said that inside every human there are 2 wolves fighting. One is kind and gentle and wants to help others, and one is savage and hungry and wants to destroy. Which wolf wins?" Kira asked. "The one you feed," Tanaka replied. "Most humans spend their lives feeding the kind wolf and starving the savage one. And that is good and right and proper. But some of us," she continued quietly, "some of us learn to feed both wolves, and we learn to let the savage one out only when it is needed. Only when there are people who need protecting and monsters who need killing. Are you not afraid of the savage wolf?" Kira whispered. Tanaka was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was heavy with old pain. "Every day," she admitted. "Every single day, I am afraid that I will let it out and not be able to put it back. Afraid that I will become the monster I was trained to fight. But I am more afraid of what happens if I do not fight. More afraid of what happens to innocent people if I let my fear stop me from doing what must be done." She looked at Kira with eyes that held both warmth and sorrow. "The demons feel no fear," Tanaka said. "They think that makes them strong, but it only makes them empty. We feel fear, and we fight anyway. And that is what makes us human, far above them." In the command chamber of the Endless Scream, War Master Quetzal made a decision that would echo through galactic history. He ordered his fleet to prepare for a massive ground assault, committing 10,000 warriors to crush the human resistance once and for all. But even as he gave the order, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered doubts that he had never felt before. For the first time in 300 years of war, War Master Quetzal was not certain of victory, and that uncertainty, that tiny seed of fear, was exactly what the humans had been trying to plant all along. The battle for Vareth 9 lasted 3 days and 3 nights. And in that time, Fenrir squad proved to the galaxy that 12 humans could hold back an army of 10,000 demons. They did not fight with honor or glory or any of the noble concepts that the elder races like to talk about in their councils and debates. They fought with traps and ambushes and psychological warfare that turned the HFY's own tactics against them tenfold. They rigged buildings to collapse on advancing demon squads, poisoned water supplies, broadcast the screams of dying warriors through stolen communication equipments so that every HFY on the planet could hear their brothers begging for mercy. They turned the night into a weapon, striking from shadows and vanishing before the demons could respond, leaving behind nothing but bodies and terror and doubt. 2 members of Fenrir squad fell during those 3 days. Sergeant Marcus Chun, who held a choke point alone for 6 hours while civilians evacuated behind him, and Corporal Elena Vasquez, who detonated herself along with a demon ammunition depot that took 400 warriors with her. The other 10 fought on. Their grief turned into cold fury that made them even more dangerous than before. By the 3rd night, the HFY assault had stalled completely. 10,000 warriors, unable to advance against 10 humans who simply refused to War Master Kethsal, watched the disaster unfold from his command ship. And for the first time in his long life, he felt something he did not recognize. The cold weight of failure pressing down on his chest. His advisors urged him to continue the assault, to throw more warriors into the grinder until the humans were simply overwhelmed by numbers. But Kethsal knew that would not work. Knew it in his bones the way he knew the rhythm of his own heartbeat. These humans could not be overwhelmed because they did not fight to win in any traditional sense. They fought to survive. And survival had no limits, no rules, no point at which it simply gave up and accepted defeat on the morning of the 4th day. War Master Kethsal did something that no demon had done in recorded history. He sent a message requesting a parley with the human commander. The response came within the hour. Commander Volkov would meet him at a burned-out temple in the neutral zone between their lines. Alone Kethsal went alone as well, though his generals protested that it was madness to meet the human without guards or weapons. If he wanted me dead, the War Master replied, he would have killed me already. And all of you as well. The temple had been beautiful once, built by the Sarishi to honor gods of peace and growth. But the war had reduced it to rubble, and Ashkethsal stood in the center of what had been the main hall, his massive form towering over the broken altar, his claws capable of tearing through starship hulls gleaming in the dim light when Volkov arrived. The War Master was struck by how ordinary the human looked. Small and gray and weathered by years. Nothing about his appearance suggesting the monster that had killed hundreds of demon warriors, but his eyes were different. Kethsal noticed. Eyes the color of winter ice that held no fear, no anger. No emotion at all except a calm patience that seemed to have no bottom. War Master Kethsal, Volkov said. His voice soft and steady. Commander Volkov, Kethsal replied. I have studied your history. I have read the reports of what you and your soldiers have done. And I still do not understand what I am facing, so I have come to ask you directly. What are you? Volkov was silent for a moment, and when he spoke his words were measured and careful. We are humans, he said simply. That is not an answer, Kethsal growled. I know many species that call themselves by their own names, but none of them fight like you. None of them can do what you have done. You have faced warriors before, Volkov replied. You have faced armies and fleets and civilizations that tried to stop your conquest with strength and numbers and technology. But you have never faced survivors. The word hung in the air between them like a blade. The HFY perfected war. Volkov continued. You bred yourselves into the ultimate warriors, removed fear and doubt, embraced death as honor. But war is a state, War Master, a condition that can be won or lost. Survival is different. Survival is a choice that must be made again and again, no matter the odds, no matter the pain, no matter how hopeless things seem. He stepped closer to the massive demon, and Kethsal found himself taking a small step back before he could stop himself. Your people fight to die gloriously, Volkov said. Mine fight to live. And we will drag ourselves through any hell, suffer any wound, Make any sacrifice to see another sunrise. That is what you face. That is what you cannot defeat. Because you cannot kill something that simply refuses to stop fighting. Quetzal stared down at the small human, and he felt the truth of those words settle into his bones like ice. Your people feel no fear, Volkov continued. You think that makes you strong, but it only makes you predictable. We feel fear every moment of every battle. Fear that our friends will die. Fear that we will fail. Fear that everything we love will be taken from us, and we fight anyway. That is the difference between us. That is why you will never defeat us. Because our fear gives us something your perfect warriors will never have. Something worth fighting for beyond our own glory. For a long moment neither of them spoke. And the ruined temple was silent, except for the distant sounds of Worth and Quetzal made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. I understand now, he said slowly. And understanding brings me no comfort. I have lived for 300 years, and I have never been afraid. Not of death, not of pain, not of any enemy I have faced. But I am afraid of you, Commander. And that fear tells me something I do not want to accept. He drew his ceremonial blade, a weapon that had killed champions of a dozen species, and held it before him. I offer single combat, the War Master declared. Not for victory, because I know I will lose, but for understanding. I must know what it feels like to face humanity's true nature before I die. Volkov studied the demon for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was almost gentle. You do not have to die here. War Master. Yes, I do, Quetzal replied. Because if I do not understand what you are, I will never be able to explain it to my people. And they will keep sending warriors to die against an enemy they cannot comprehend. Let me face you. Let me feel what my soldiers felt. Let me carry that knowledge into death so that others might learn from it. Volkov nodded slowly and drew his own blade. A simple combat knife that looked like a toy compared to the demon's massive sword. The fight was brutal and Short Quetzal was stronger. Faster, more skilled in every traditional measure of combat. But Volkov did not fight with strength or speed or skill. He fought like a cornered animal with nothing to lose and everything to protect. Ignoring wounds that should have been fatal, pressing forward when any sane being would have retreated. Using every dirty trick that 3 million years of human evolution had taught his species, he fought without honor. Without rules, without hesitation, he fought to survive when Quetzal finally fell. His body broken and bleeding on the temple floor. The War Master looked up at the human standing over him with something like peace in his dying eyes. Now I understand, he whispered. You are not warriors, you are survivors. And survivors cannot be conquered. Tell your people what you learned here, Volkov said quietly. Kneeling beside the dying demon. I will, Quetzal promised. I will tell them to seek other prey, to leave your kind alone, to never again make the mistake of thinking you are weak. You have given me a gift, Commander. The gift of understanding something I could never have learned any other way. Die well. War Master, Volkov replied, and there was respect in his voice. I already have, Quetzal said. And then he was gone. 3 hours later, the Quetzal fleet received orders from their dying War Master's final transmission. Withdraw from Vareth 9. Return to Dominion space. Report to the High Council that humanity was not to be conquered. The war was over, and across the galaxy. As news of the demon retreat spread, the elder races watched in stunned silence as the juvenile species accomplished what no civilization had done in 10,000 years. They had made the demons afraid, and in the halls of power, a new question began to whisper through the corridors. If the humans could defeat the Quetzal, the most feared warriors in the galaxy, what else were they capable of? Should the Concord be relieved that the demons had been stopped? Or should they be terrified of what they had just discovered about their youngest members? The galaxy would spend a long time searching for that answer, and humanity would spend a long time deciding what kind of answer they wanted to give. 1 year had passed since the battle for Verith 9, and the galaxy had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The Cathvori Dominion had retreated to their own borders for the first time in 10,000 years. Their warriors whispering stories of the human monsters who smiled while they killed. Their leaders studying the dying message of Warmaster Quetzal and wondering if they had finally found an enemy they could not defeat. The Galactic Concord still met in the great chamber of Threshold Prime. But now when human ambassadors spoke, the elder races listened with a new kind of attention. It was no longer the gentle condescension they had shown to the juvenile species before the war. It was respect. Yes, but also something else. A wariness. A caution. The careful attention that prey animals give to predators they cannot quite understand. Ambassador Yellen Vasquez stood before the Concord on the anniversary of the demon retreat and spoke words that would be remembered for centuries. "You fear us now," she said simply, her voice carrying through the ancient chamber. "I can see it in your eyes. Feel it in the way you watch our representatives. Hear it in the questions you do not dare to ask. You wonder if you should fear us more than you feared the demons." The chamber was silent, and Vasquez let that silence stretch before she continued. "I will not pretend that your fear is unfounded, because you have seen what we are capable of, and you know now that we hid it from you, that we showed you only our curiosity and our kindness while keeping our wolves chained in the dark. But I want you to understand something important about humanity, something that the Cathvori learned too late. We do not celebrate our capacity for violence. We mourn it. The elite units exist not because we are proud of what we can become, but because we understand the cost of failing to protect what we love. Every human who serves in those units pays a price that you cannot imagine. A price in sleepless nights and broken relationships and memories that never stop hurting. They give up their peace so that others can keep theirs. And we honor their sacrifice not by glorifying it, but by hoping that we will never need them again. On Earth, in a small cabin by the gray northern sea, Commander Alexander Volkov was learning how to be Sasha again. Fenris Squad had been officially disbanded 3 months after the war ended. Its surviving members scattered back to the lives they had left behind, trying to remember how to be human when they had spent so long learning to be something else. Sasha sat on his porch every morning and watched the waves roll in, counting the seabirds and trying to convince himself that the shadows in the corners were just shadows. Nothing more. He planted a garden behind the cabin, spending hours with his hands in the dirt, growing vegetables and flowers that he gave to his neighbors because he had no family of his own. The nightmares still came, but they were less frequent now, and he had learned to recognize the signs when the darkness started to creep back into his mind. Had visited the families of Marcus Chen and Elena Vasquez, the 2 members of Fenris Squad who had not come home, and he had sat with their parents and siblings and children and told them stories about how their loved ones had lived and laughed and loved. He did not tell them the details of how they had died, because some truths were too heavy for anyone to carry who did not have Verith 9. Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka had opened a clinic in the rebuilt capital city, treating Surishi children with the same gentle hands that had once killed 40 demon warriors in a single night. When people asked her why she stayed on an alien world instead of returning to Earth, she always gave the same answer: monsters should learn to build, not just destroy. Otherwise, what was the point of surviving? She still woke up some nights with her hands reaching for weapons that were not there, still felt the cold presence of her other self lurking just beneath the surface of her mind. But every morning, she got up and went to work. And every patient she healed pushed the darkness a little further away. One evening, a young Surishi girl named Kira came to visit Tanaka at the clinic. Now old enough to remember the war, but young enough to still have questions. "Can you tell me about the human soldiers who saved us?" Kira asked, her 4 eyes bright with curiosity. Tanaka smiled sadly and sat down beside the girl. And for a long moment she did not speak. Long ago, she finally began. "My grandmother told me that inside every human there are 2 wolves. One of light that wants to help and heal and protect, and one of darkness that wants to hunt and fight and kill. Most humans feed the wolf of light and let the other starve. And that is good and right and how things should be. But some of us learn to feed both wolves. And when the time comes, when innocent people are in danger and monsters need to be stopped, we open the cage and let the dark wolf run." Kira listened with wide eyes. And when Tanaka paused, the girl asked the question that had haunted her since the war. "Are you not afraid of the dark wolf?" Tanaka looked out the window at the city that had been rebuilt from ashes, at children playing in streets that had once been battlefields, at a world that had been saved by monsters who chose to be heroes every day. She admitted, "Every single day I am afraid that the dark wolf will break free when I do not want it to. Afraid that I will become the very thing I fought against. But that fear is what makes me human." The demons felt no fear. And look what they became. Empty warriors with no purpose except destruction. We feel fear. And we fight anyway. That is our gift and our curse. That is why we survive. Across the galaxy, in the shadows of 100 worlds, human soldiers stood quiet watch. They were peacekeepers and diplomats and aid workers and 1,000 other things that the galaxy expected from the friendly young species that had joined the Concord 2 centuries ago. But underneath those masks they carried something else. A heritage written in their blood and their bones. A legacy of survival against predators and nature and each other that stretched back 3 million years. They hoped they would never be needed again. They trained every day for the moment when they would be, and somewhere in the darkness, in the quiet spaces between the stars, the wolves waited, patient and loyal and utterly without mercy for those who threatened what they loved. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity's elite units, but they had not yet learned the most important truth. The 12 soldiers who had broken the Kefri were not special, were not genetic experiments or cyborg warriors or anything that the elder races could explain and categorize. They were simply humans who had been given permission to stop, pretending every human alive carried the same wolves inside them, the same capacity for terrible violence, the same inheritance of survival, the same ancient darkness that had kept their ancestors alive through ice ages and famines and wars, beyond counting. The difference between a farmer and a warrior, between a teacher and a killer, between a healer and a monster, was nothing more than a choice. And if the galaxy ever truly threatened what humanity loved, if any force ever made the mistake of backing the human race into a corner, then every single member of that juvenile species would make that choice. 8 billion wolves, waiting to be unleashed. 8 billion survivors who would drag themselves through any hell to see another sunrise. Billion reasons why the galaxy should be very, very careful about what they did next. But for now, in the quiet aftermath of victory, Sasha Volkov sat on his porch and watched the waves. And Yuki Tanaka healed children in a clinic on a world she had saved. And humanity went on being curious and emotional and short-lived. And everything that the elder races found so charmingly primitive, the wolves were sleeping. The darkness was chained, and the galaxy was learning, slowly and painfully, that the most dangerous creatures in the universe were not the ones who felt no fear. They were the ones who felt fear every single day and chose to fight anyway, not for glory, not for conquest, not for honor, but for love always, and only for love, and against that, no army in existence could ever truly stand.